You're listening to Food Rebels, and welcome. This is the podcast that brings you brands, chefs, and live on-air tastings. A show that's dedicated to the more rebellious side of the food world, where we celebrate the people who have challenged the status quo. We'll be giving you a peek behind the curtains and inside the minds of the people who are shaking up our food industry. You know me, I'm the show host, AJ Sharp, taste expert, food writer, great taste food judge, and of course, business owner. I love meeting new people and tasting new foods. So, sit back as we hear more stories from people in food who dare to be different. I'm really excited this week. We have a very special guest on the show. We've got Jay Rayner, who really needs no introduction, but restaurant critic extraordinaire, BBC MasterChef, The Kitchen Cabinet, Out to Lunch, and we've got him on the show today to talk about his Nights Out at Home book. Hi, Jay. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Delightful to be here, particularly after that glowing introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Well, I'm a mega fan. After our meeting at the Folkestone Literary Festival, where I got to ask all the questions I ever wanted to ask about what it's like being a restaurant critic.
It was fun. It was a great chat. It was a great audience as well. They were properly engaged, which was delightful. Because the last thing I ever want to do is bore an audience.
No, I don't think so. I seem to remember everyone being in absolute stitches. We were really talking about everything because your Nights Out at Home book is kind of part recipe book, part memoir. Is that how you describe it?
I needed a way in which to look back at 25 years as a restaurant critic and devise. I also did want to write a recipe book, which was me coming up with recipes inspired by my favourite dishes. But I think it's fair to say that people know me as a writer, and it would have been a bit odd if what I had delivered had been a bare-bones functional cookbook. And the mantra with this one was always that it should live as comfortably on the bedside table as it should in the kitchen. So it's very much one you can cook from, and I've been thrilled and slightly weirdly surprised, and it is weird, at the number of people who have been cooking the recipes. I mean, what was I thinking was going to happen? I wrote 60 recipes, and lo and behold, people are cooking them and enjoying them and sending me messages and sending me photographs. That's lovely. But there are also people who are writing me and saying, I just finished reading Nights Out at Home, which is not normally the way you interact with a cookbook, is it? You sort of dip in, you dip out. But no, clearly people are reading this one.
I mean, I read it. I absolutely loved it. I devoured it. For me, it was the sections which you have called intercourse between all of your different chapters on drink.
I feel the need to say that the slightly juvenile title was my editor's idea, but I was fully with it.
But those are the best bits. I was sort of living for those bits because there was little kind of chapters and interludes in between that gave this insight into your life and what's been going on and where you've been. And they're so funny. I mean,
I hope so, because I've always, again, used the word mantra. I think a writer is of no use if they're not read. And it is the writer's job to make you read. Nobody else can make you read something. And just being told it's good for you is not good enough. You need to be entertaining. Nobody needs to read a single thing you've written, not even your mother. And so it is kind of my responsibility to be as entertaining as I possibly can. It's a little bit precocious, a little bit tap dancing in the middle of the stage, with red hair and tap shoes going, look at me, look at me, look at me. But I don't really have a problem with that as long as people feel that it rewards the effort.
Absolutely. I mean, just for the listeners who maybe haven't read the book yet, there's, I think, 60 recipes across the whole book, and each of them is some of the best things that you've tasted at different restaurants, and you've recreated them at home.
Well, not recreated. I've used the word inspired because I'm not a restaurant chef. I don't have a brigade of cooks, and I don't want people to think, oh, how can I achieve these dishes? But often in a restaurant, a dish will be more an idea than necessarily a recipe. And there's an idea at the heart where you go, oh, that's simple, I can do that. The key thing is that these are from restaurants you may not have heard of, some of them you may have heard of, but they're not the big name chefs because they've all got their cookbooks. I don't need to give you a recipe for something that Angela Hartnett cooks at Murano because there are her cookbooks. These are places that are less likely to have cookbooks. But yeah, they're me coming out with recipes inspired by or reverse engineered from. I've done a lot of that over the years. You eat something, you think, oh, that was good. I wonder if I could just nick that and try and do it at home. It's not the same as going to a restaurant. And I do say very clearly, this book is not a replacement for going to restaurants. Please go to them. There's a full list of all the restaurants at the back, at least those that were open at the point the book was published. It's not quite still the case. and support restaurants. But if you want to cook some nice, interesting things at home with a good story, here you go.
Fantastic. You start with this daiquiri, don't you? I mean, daiquiri's your favourite drink. Can you tell me about that?
Funnily enough, I've gone through various sort of cocktail moments. And actually, when I started thinking about what it was about the daiquiri, which I like, and there are a lot of drinks with the word daiquiri attached to them, and most of them aren't actually a daiquiri. So a classic daiquiri should just be white rum. You can use brown. I find it a little bit overwhelming. But let's say white rum, lime juice, sugar syrup. That's it. And it's about the balance of them. And bartenders, mixologists, cocktail makers will tell you that it's quite a challenge because the balance has to be right. But let's put the technical stuff to one side. When I was a kid, by which I mean a teenager who was, surreptitiously drinking on the side my parents didn't know, my drink of choice was a vodka and lime. Now, there is an argument that I haven't really moved very far from that. If we're thinking a lime syrup and a hard liquor mixed together, look where I am. But a really well-made daiquiri, chilled in a long stem glass so your hand doesn't warm the bowl of the glass, is a brilliant way to start a night. It really, really is. And I like to think of it as, if I think back to the young version of me, well, this is the sophisticated version of me in middle age.
It's a wonderful insight into this life, which does sound, to us ordinary folks, so glamorous.
I worried about that because it's basically, I describe. I'm not in a cocktail bar every night. I'm not in a wingback chair. Blimey, cocktails are expensive. But if I happen to be out and the restaurant I'm reviewing is in London and I'm meeting a friend before, I might suggest a bar and I will have a daiquiri. This is not every single night, AJ. I just want to be absolutely clear.
I believe you, honestly. One of the things, and I said this to you when I met you before, that really comes across is that you aren't obviously in a restaurant every night, and your love for your family and your wife and your kids really comes through in the pages. There's such a warmth of gentle ribbing, and it's really, it's a love letter to your family as well as restaurants and everything.
That we're four adults rubbing along quite well together in the modern property market where perhaps the younger people are not getting to move out as quickly as they would like. I'm privileged in that I live in a sizable house, so we don't get under each other's feet. But we all do like our food. Funnily enough, only last night, as we're talking, I had an absolute disaster with the thing I was trying to cook. And I was quite touched by how polite they all were. I'm not going to tell you what it was, only because I'm determined to get it right. And I have got it right in the past, and something went wrong last night. But they were all very lovely to me and said, doesn't happen often, does it?
No. Actually, when I last saw you, you just got two kittens. I know it's not on the subject, but how are they?
Oh, they're fine. They're fine. I think each of us has a pair of jeans that's been shredded by their claws. But they are delightful. I was a little bit resistant, but I gave in to the majority view. I have to work in my office with the door closed because they're quite clingy. And it is quite hard to write when they come and sit on your keyboard and look at you expectantly as if you're about to do something. And what I want to do is write, not have to move a kitten to one side.
And what are they called?
They're called shrimp and lobster.
That's it. Shrimp and lobster. Too funny.
Shrimp and lobster, yeah.
So while you're avoiding shrimp and lobster, who are you writing for at the moment? Because last time I saw you, you were just finishing up at The Observer.
I am finishing up at The Observer. So it is, in the way of employment law, I had to give 3 months' notice. So my last review will appear in The Observer on March the 9th, so written late February. And my first review should appear in the Financial Times on March the 22nd. It's quite a culture shock to be even thinking about it. I've been on The Observer for over 28 years, and I've been the restaurant critic for now 26. And it is, as I say, quite shocking to me that, after pretty much a lifetime's career in one place, I'm moving to another. But, one doesn't necessarily get to choose the circumstances. And as you may be aware, The Guardian has decided to transfer The Observer to another publisher, Tortoise, and therefore decisions had to be taken. And a very nice offer came my way, and I'm a huge admirer of the Financial Times. It's weekend edition. Because of the name, people have assumptions about what that paper is. And yes, if you are in the city and you need financial information, you will get it from the FT. But its arts and culture coverage, its lifestyle coverage, and its food coverage particularly, is terrific. And there's a bit of a shake-up going on. So my predecessor, Tim Hayward, still writing the restaurant reviews, will move to write a monthly column, which is his thing, getting under the hood of how to create dishes at home. And we're joined by Marina O'Loughlin, used to be my colleague at The Guardian, then at the Sunday Times, terrific writer. And she'll be writing her take on food restaurants in all their ways on a monthly basis as well. So it's a hell of a team.
That's punchy team.
Yeah, and obviously, last but literally not least, Jancis Robinson on wine.
Wow.
You know, she's the greatest. She's the one everybody else would like to be.
Yeah.
Saves me having to say too much about wine in my column, frankly. But when you put that together, Tim Hayward, Marina O'Loughlin, Jancis Robinson, and me, it's not exactly Avengers Assemble, but, you know.
No, it's a formidable team, though. I started my career in wine PR, and Jancis Robinson, we all had a very healthy respect for making sure we got things right there.
I'm sure you did.
Absolutely fantastic writer and really very, very knowledgeable.
Incredibly knowledgeable.
Just going back to your book, how's it been going? You've been doing tours, haven't you, all the way around the country?
Well, I'm thrilled to say it's gone very well indeed. It is by far my biggest selling book to date.
Is it? Because you've written a lot of books, haven't you? Is it 13?
I think 13, 14. I get a little 14. Lost. But yeah, this one, particularly given it's a hardback and they're not cheap, although you can get them reasonably discounted, but they're not cheap. So a good sale of a hardback, oh, look, thank you for holding it up, is a beautiful thing. And so it's done very nicely. And I'm rather proud of it. It's just the feedback has been so lovely. And on tour as well. I've been doing these one-man shows around my books for quite a while now, and this one is a lot of fun. It's me being grilled to a turn by some of my most famous friends. By friends, I mean acquaintances or people I once worked with. So it's, you know, Stanley Tucci asking me what the hell I know about anything. And
wow.
Rob Brydon, are you just an insufferable snob? And so forth. And actually, having done a dozen shows in the autumn when the book was launched, we're doing another 5 in the spring. So I'm going to Leeds, Liverpool, Oxford, Nottingham and Richmond, southwest London. And as ever, you can find links for those on my website, jayrayner.co.uk.
Excellent. I would check those out. You know, the show that I was at, it was absolutely hilarious. We were all in stitches. But I just wanted to draw attention to some of the beautiful imagery you have throughout the book where can you tell me about it? Is it a local artist?
Well, not local to me. So his name is Jack William Martindale. And I met him pre-COVID, it will have been, I think probably 2019. He came up to me at a show in Nottingham when I was doing the signing at the end. And he gave me a little self-published pamphlet of his illustrations. He said, I'm an illustrator. And I often do stuff around food, and I thought they were lovely. And as I've often done in the past, I directed the art director of the Guardian Observer to him, said you should use it. They didn't. And then when we were pulling this book together, it was clear there weren't going to be photographs. It wasn't going to be one of those full colour plate books. But then quite late, they said, you know, we can do 4-page little inserts, which can have colour. So we agreed that on the outside pages, the singles, those would be menus, because people love looking at menus and trying to decide what they might have. And then across the middle spreads, we decided to have illustrations of the outside of restaurants. And I went to a meeting. The art director had pulled in lots of very significant, very experienced illustrators, but I'd managed to get him to also bring in Jack stuff. And the meeting went on. Eventually I said, look, I find it a little hard to choose. Do you think Jack is any lesser than any of these guys? They went, no. I said, then let's give it to him, because young people don't get a start unless you do that. And I think he's done a beautiful job. We have illustrations of Bocca di Lupo, Tayyab's a great Pakistani grill house, of a lovely place in New York. It's called an appetizer or deli, called Russ and Daughters. And of course, a branch of the mighty Greg's in Newcastle, because I have a recipe for the Greg's steak bake. And he's also done lovely line drawings of ingredients and stuff. I think they make the book. They really do. And I'm really proud to have his work there. If it's the start of a fantastic career, what a place to start with me. I'm delighted.
Just going back to what you were saying about photographs, it's really interesting because a cookbook always has all these beautiful photographs and you're sort of almost expecting all these photographs to be shot through, but you had a whole reason, didn't you, for leaving them out?
If you go on to a well-known online bookseller, you will find a few 2-star reviews complaining about the lack of photographs. Well, you know, if they'd done a bit of reading, they'd have known that was the case. I have some beautiful full-colour cookbooks and I adore them. But there's 2 points. One, food photography has got to such a point that I fear they're an invitation to fail, that your food can never actually look as good as the thing you're staring at. And 2, it's expensive. A full-colour cookbook is now about £30. and I wanted to keep the price down. So not using them, not including them, kept the price down to £22. That's the full retail price. That said, I understand that people like images. And all the way through the research and writing of this book, I had taken my own pictures on my iPhone of every dish as I made it. And I'm not saying they're beautiful, I'm not saying they're wonderful, but they are real. And so what we did was put together a gallery on my website of every single dish, and it's almost every single dish, the pictures that I took, and there's a QR code in the book, and you can shoot the QR code and you've got access. And the QR code thing is significant because most people will be in the kitchen when they will be in the kitchen when they're cooking, and their access is through a phone or a tablet. So if you want to see what the thing you want to cook is meant to look like, it's there. It's not glamorous, it's rarely sexy, but it will tell you what it's meant to look like.
And it's real, isn't it? I think this is for me, this was one of your first books I'd ever read. I've read your reviews, obviously, many times. And the thing that really came through to me was you're expecting a food critic to be a bit of a food snob. And there's obviously an element of that because you're critiquing it. Of course there is. But it doesn't come across as snobby. It comes across as just wanting things done as well as they possibly can be. And with that, I loved that you don't get caught up on authenticity to the point that, yes, the authentic version of this dish may be done in a certain way, but if it doesn't taste very nice, it's not really worth it.
What does the word authentic mean? It's used and abused by people trying to prove their credentials and how well travelled they are, and yet it doesn't really mean anything. For a start, when people say, well, there is a way that it must be done, all recipes at some point didn't exist and then they did exist. They were created. So authentic just means this is what the recipe was. But then when the recipe is written down, it depends on who's holding the pen. And one of the classic things, I reference this in the book, is there's part of the kitchen cabinet, the Radio 4 food panel show I do. We travel all over the country and we often talk about regional foods. And I learned very quickly when we launched in 2012 that a regional dish did not have a set recipe. So in Liverpool, we were talking about lobscouse. And lobscouse is a stew, much like many regional stews, using cheap cuts of lamb and vegetables. It's a way of extending those expensive cuts of meat. And we asked people if they had a recipe in the room, and up the hands went, and every single one was different. It was depending on what their culture was. Yes, the essentials were the same, but the recipe itself was different. And I thought that was really interesting. Plus, authentic is not the same as good. Now, we can all differ on, what's nice and what isn't. I'm not a big fan of Cantonese braised chicken feet. I know some people are, and that's fine. I don't think they're very nice. I think they're a product of poverty because you can't leave anything behind where money is tight. They're absolutely authentic in the sense that they come from that culinary tradition, but does that mean they're good? I'm not so sure. So I don't think it's a helpful term in any way in food. And I do think it's used as a stick to beat people with.
I can see that. And it's something that I think people get very excited about. I think a mutual friend of ours, Malika Basu, whose job it is to kind of look at cultural appropriation in recipes and make sure that things are kept really appropriate to the culture. But I think there's room for both of these things.
Yeah, but cultural appropriation is a different thing. Cultural appropriation is somebody from outside of a culture adopting a dish and saying, I've done it the right way. I'm making money off of somebody else's tradition. There are ways of saying, look, this is not as you might find it in Pakistan or Bangladesh, but it uses the ideas thereof. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with cooking something like that. If you are within a certain culinary tradition, there will be a pressure to do it the right way. But even then, Malika will absolutely tell you that, again, if you were to sit down with a whole bunch of cooks in any part of the Indian subcontinent and say, how do you make a puri or whatever, or a chat, they will all have different recipes.
And it's the terminology, isn't it?
It's the terminology. And nothing is set in stone. Recipes are not set in stone. And they change and they move. And, one of the hilarious things is I love the fact that carbonara, do you remember the rage from the Italians when people were putting cream in their carbonara? Because it's meant to be about thickened with starchy water. Well, just hold up a minute, because carbonara was invented towards the end of the Second World War for the American troops coming up Italy. So this is a dish that goes back, to 1944. I don't think we can get too precious here about something that was invented.
I agree with you. Talking of precious, one of the parts in your book that really made me laugh out loud is during the methodology. And you think, how interesting is it to read a methodology? But actually, there's all these sections in there, what was one of them? Oh, if it says 1.5 eggs, then it's worth, throwing the recipe book against the wall because it's just too annoying.
Yeah, it's a recipe. I think it's the recipe for meringues. And it is not a recipe for one meringue. It's a recipe for 2, each one to be shared between 2, which roughly uses 3 egg whites. And I say roughly because I think it's a game changer. It's a method I picked up from Jeremy Lee of Quo Vadis. But yeah, a recipe book that says use the whites of 1.5 eggs would be so infuriating.
Yeah.
So don't do that. And I will go back to that meringue tip, and it's what I picked up from Jeremy, was one of the problems with meringue recipes, you often end up with a sort of syrup leakage. And the reason is that you've got too much sugar to the eggs, because not all eggs are the same. We know there are small, medium, large, extra large eggs. And the absolute killer tip from Jeremy was weigh your egg whites, and then you exactly double the amount of caster sugar to that weight, and then you fold it in 2 halves. Absolute game change. My meringues are a joy.
Excellent. Although I have to say, I do quite like the leakage where it goes all crispy and crunchy around the edge. There's something to that.
I recognise your point. I absolutely do. Yeah, but that's one of those cook's perks that you pick off the greaseproof paper, isn't it?
Exactly that. The other one that made me laugh was about a piped finish. And, if you've got friends that are impressed with a piped finish, it's probably time to get new friends.
Yes. It says you can pipe this if you like, if that sort of things that impress your friends. But I just did it with a spoon. And if your friends aren't impressed, just get new friends. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly that. Just made me roar with laughter. It's very entertaining because there's all these different sections in the book that it's not just recipes and you kind of talking about your experience of what you were trying to do to recreate the dish, but you share quite openly these sections of what it's been like to be a food critic all these years of eating in restaurants. You have a very unique experience when you go to a restaurant, don't you?
I suppose, they don't know I'm coming. So people I'm still amazed at the number of PRs, for example, who said, can we book you in? It's like, I've been doing this for 25 years. You must know that we book our own tables and we don't accept comps. And yet endless young, I suppose, restaurant PRs keep trying to invite me. And it's infuriating. And I shouldn't get so cross, but I do. I book under a pseudonym. They don't know I'm coming. And then I arrive. Now, if the restaurant is any good at what they're doing, it will be fine. It will be nothing. There won't really be an odd experience. I'll just sit there and I'll have dinner. And yes, they will keep coming around saying, how is everything? And my companions are now warned that they have to say fine, because being polite people, they'll always want to say it's lovely. And if they say that, and I don't think it is, they might be giving the wrong message to the restaurant. And I'm the one writing the column. When someone comes with me on a review, I love their company or I wouldn't invite them. And I generally love the fact that they like to eat or I wouldn't invite them. I'm not really interested in what they think. Some find this a bit difficult, but, unless they say something really insightful and brilliantly phrased, in which case I'm having it because I'm paying for dinner.
Yeah,
and by I mean my newspaper is paying for dinner, but they're getting a free one.
That's brilliant. Yeah, so you're not taking it, you're not kind of doing this by committee. This is what you think of each of the different dishes, and it has to be.
I'm absolutely not writing this by committee, because the committee would not be sitting there when I get the abuse from people who don't approve. The committee might be there, might think they're there at the meal, but they're definitely not there once the review is out. So, no, it is not by committee. It's my name in the masthead, and therefore I must take complete responsibility for it, and I absolutely do, and therefore I'm delighted you've joined me for dinner. And now I'm going to tell you what to eat.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to order for you. You were saying how, yes, you'll book your table, obviously, under a pseudonym of some description, and you'll turn up, and people can't change things that much, can they, on the night of,
No.
As you walk through the door and they suddenly go, oh, crumbs, it's Jay Rayner, quick.
Let's change our menu, change our dishes, change our staff, change our decor. No. There was a brilliant line by a former London restaurant critic, Terry Durek, who once said, I'm yet to find a bad restaurant that becomes a good one because I walk through the door. Doesn't happen. And sure, they can try to show me a better time, but I am a cynical sod and I've seen it all. And if you try to send me freebies, I will send them back. Because that's the massive sacrifice I make. If you try to serve me before the people are already seated when I arrived, I will note it and I will ask you to serve them first. I'll try and do this as politely as possible. But, yeah, I don't try it on. Just treat me like a punter, even if you don't think I am.
I was so surprised when you said sometimes not everything that you've ordered is necessarily on the bill at the end of the day, to try and make it look like it's cheaper.
Absolutely classic. So many times something is left off the bill. And you go, no, can you take this back and put the bottle of wine on, please? And you think they're only doing this because they want to make it look slightly cheaper as an experience than it actually is. And look, I understand. I'm not there to trip up restaurants. I'm really not. I hope what comes across from Nights Out at Home is how much I adore restaurants. I love them and I want them to flourish. But there are things, if you're going to do this job, this slightly weird job, you have to keep certain rules, because otherwise it just becomes a mess and it's untrustworthy.
One of the things that really comes across in the book is actually this quite down-to-earth thing. I mean, there's some slightly surreal moments where during lockdown you're on Zoom with Michel Roux Jr. and he's just casually teaching you how to cook something.
Well, it was almost the antecedents of the book in a way, because there was a point. I mean, as I say, I've always reverse engineered, come up with dishes inspired by my favourite restaurant. Been doing it for decades. But during lockdown, I thought it'd be fun to try and cook some absolutely totemic restaurant dishes. And one of those was the soufflé suissesse from Le Gavroche. And I know Michel well enough to say, can I get you up on FaceTime? And you can watch me do it. I remember the moment when he said, did you just lick your fingers? I went, oh, mate. All right, I'll wash my hands. I won't do that again. I am in the domestic kitchen. But soufflé suissesse, which is sort of a double-cooked cheese soufflé, but with ridiculous amounts of cheese cream. That was nice. I did the Pierre Kaufmann famous pig's trotters stuffed with the mousseline of sweetbreads and morels, which was very hard work. I didn't have Pierre's help with that. But, it was basically, you set yourself a really ridiculous food challenge and see what you can do, because you've got nothing else going on in your life. And it was fun. So yeah, no, I've included a section on that. Those aren't recipes. They're sort of, I think I call it cooking the food of the gods.
Yeah.
Because it's these three dishes. The other one is Joël Robuchon's pomme purée. I'm not sure if people are aware of what Joël Robuchon did to mashed potato, but he improved it by putting less potato in it. It's basically 1-to-1 potato and butter. And it has become the model for how to make mashed potato. So that creamy whipped pomme puree that you find in fancy restaurants, which feels more like a condiment than a carbohydrate, that's Joël Robuchon's. And I don't need to give the recipes for those because they are all available online. You will find them everywhere. So there's no point. But I want to describe the process of trying to cook them.
Oh, it's beautiful. And then at the other end of the spectrum, things that I think probably you won't find online is the Greg's steak bake and the McDonald's apple pie. What was the inspiration for those?
I thought it'd be fun. I think
fun.
Greg's is a fascinating business for a start. A fascinating business. And its reach is extraordinary. Their marketing is brilliant. No, we should not eat the output of Greg's all the time, although everybody loves a pie. We have a pie culture in this country. And the Greg's steak bake, I just thought it would be fun if I took it and kind of built on the idea of a pocket of beef and gravy. Although my ingredients are, there's quite a lot of them. I worked out that if you were to sell it retail, the ingredients for each one actual cost about £3.30. So you'd probably have to charge about £12 retail. So I'm not a threat to Greg's. And the McDonald's deep fried apple pie, it's a great item.
It's a classic.
The US got rid of them about 3 decades ago. I'm always proud of the fact that we still have them.
Why did they get rid of them?
For health reasons.
No, actually.
Which I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit like going into a brothel and complaining about all the sex going on in there. Do you know what I mean? So I was actually intrigued by working with shop-bought puff pastry and the things you can do with it. And actually, what I learnt from both of those is that it's all about contrast between heat and cold. So with the apple pies, they need to be absolutely frozen when they hit the boiling oil, and that's how you stop them puffing and flaking.
Yeah, the apple pie and the steak bake was so surprising. I just remember coming into this chapter and thinking, did not expect to find that in here.
The other one, which I'm very pleased with, is the piri piri chicken livers.
Oh, yes.
Which
from
is
Nando's.
a dish. Well, you will find them on Nando's, and I'm going to confess, mine are better than Nando's.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, theirs are great. I love theirs. I really do. The difference is that mine are a single process, which takes about 30 minutes, whereas I think theirs come in pre-marinated, and it does make a difference. That peri-peri sauce, those livers, it's really, really good.
Right, I'm going to have to try those. So far, I've made your anchovy mayonnaise, which was absolutely delicious with steak.
Well, you usually made my anchovy mayonnaise. That's an idea, isn't it? Blitz some anchovies into mayonnaise.
But it was so good. It was so worth it.
It's so simple, isn't it? And so it's just one of those you go, oh, right, okay, yeah, I'll do that a lot. It's not anchovy hollandaise. It was based on the loving the anchovy hollandaise at Hawksmoor. And if you want to learn to make hollandaise, there are many recipes out there which will teach you how to make hollandaise. I'm not going to teach you how to make hollandaise. Go and look online for that. But this is, an additional idea which can get you a bit of that hit, which is blitz some anchovies into mayonnaise. Works every time.
Amazing. You talk a lot about finding things online. Obviously, online is a massive resource now. We've got bloggers and Substackers and Instagrammers, of which you're big on Instagram, aren't you?
Yeah, I am on Instagram. I post there, and I have to say, I think a lot of the initial success of the book was down to some Instagram reels that we did, particularly the Tyab's lamb chops. That went pretty damn viral. I think it's 800,000 views now.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a lot of views, and a lot of people suddenly saying, oh, I love tandoori lamb chops. I'm going to get the book for this recipe. And I was sent the graph of sales when the moment that dropped, and blimey, they meant it.
Wow.
So, there is a snobbery among certain of my brethren in, old school media about these things. And I think, get over yourselves. There's bad mainstream media and there's good, and there's bad social media and there's good, and there are some brilliant people out there. There's a guy called El Burrito Monster. I don't know if you've come across El Burrito Monster, which is this young kid who does far too much cooking, every process, each process is seconds, and he's doing insane amounts of work. Solely so he can then wrap it up at the end and turn it into a burrito. And I recommend El Burrito Monster. I'm completely addicted to him.
I think I've seen this now.
Yeah, he's a handsome chap who sits outside staring at the camera, chopping up potatoes, braising beef, making his own naans. It's just insane amounts of work goes into every one of these videos.
Wow.
And they are very entertaining. And then there's a chap, Will Hughes. What would he cook? And Will has actually ended up as a panelist on the kitchen cabinet with us every single day. He has a particular tone to him, which is just very funny. And yes, there's also awful stuff. Awful stuff. But as I say, there's a lot of awful stuff everywhere. So it's not about the medium. It's never about the medium. It's always about the specific thing.
And do you ever go back to your reviews and the things that you've written in the past? Do you ever go back and revisit or say, oh, do you know, I've actually changed my mind about this now? Or
this is going to sound extremely arrogant, but no. There's one review that I got wrong, which was of a small Mumbai inspired cafe that opened on St. Martin's Lane. And I didn't think very much of it. And I just kind of dismissed it and said, I think they're going to try and roll this out in some way, but I don't think it's up to much. Anyway, Dishoom is doing fine. I absolutely got Dishoom completely wrong. And I don't mean just that I was wrong about whether they succeed, but actually the quality of what they do as well is very, very good. So I got that one wrong. Other than that, no. There's nothing I look back at and say, well, you didn't call that right, did you? How do I put this? Restaurant reviewing is an ephemeral business. We can say it's not important, although I would argue that how we live our lives, how we get our pleasure is actually what part of the point of life. We work hard, we struggle for money, and how we then spend it is important. But although it's ephemeral, I still think it's important I take it seriously, because otherwise what's the point? And you're dealing with people's businesses, you're dealing with people's livelihoods, and so you have to be careful.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's a responsibility, isn't it? I do some food judging for various different food award schemes, and I really feel this need to be very accurate and kind with feedback. Even if you're saying something's pretty awful, you're trying to say it in the most constructively helpful way possible so that they actually have something to improve. They know what to do about it.
I mean, the one thing I would say, I think it's something that has changed with me, is I generally hold to a rule, which is that you punch up, not down. And so the restaurants that are going to get my eye these days are the highly capitalized, very expensive ones that are promising some delicious experience at high prices and then don't deliver on that. Whereas if it's a mom or pop operation and it's not succeeding, I'm more likely just to pay the bill and move on and not write about it at all. Yeah. But if that happened, it would generally be a failure of me in research and ending up there. So, I try to think very carefully about these things.
Because you're always looking for a story, aren't you? When you pick a restaurant, you've got to find something that's interesting. I mean, I imagine it's quite hard to decide which restaurant to go to.
Yes, it's about to become much easier, funnily enough, because one of the problems of being on The Observer was I've had to divide them up with Grace Dent on The Guardian so that we didn't review the same place each weekend. So we had to be different. If she took one place, I couldn't do it. That's no longer going to be a problem at the FT. I will be able to range far and wide. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, the issue is, gastropubs. There's lots of nice gastropubs, but they've all got the same menu. There's almost an English gastropub menu now with a beetroot and goat's cheese salad terrine and risotto to start, and then a sea bass ribeye and pork belly for mains, and a lemon tart and a chocolate fondant and a sticky toffee pudding for dessert. And I couldn't write anything about that. However nice it was, I couldn't get 1,100 words out of that. So I'm always looking for the story. And in a way, I hope that's what comes across in Nights Out at Home, that it's about the stories. It's about telling people's stories in as detailed a way as possible.
Just before we go, tell people where they can buy this.
So Nights Out at Home is available from all good booksellers, probably a few bad ones as well. It's available online. You can get signed copies from a couple of online booksellers. If you go to the link tree in my profiles on social media, you will find links to all the online booksellers who have signed copies, but also support your independence. They are the lifeblood of the book business.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Jay, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Absolutely brilliant to see you and catch up with you again.
Brilliant to chat. Thanks so much, AJ.
Thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to Food Rebels, which is available on radio stations around the UK and further afield. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Audible. Please remember to subscribe and rate us with 5 stars or follow us. It makes such a difference, not just to our podcast and radio show, but it really helps to support the guests that come on the show with us. We're also on Instagram at food_rebels. So give us a follow, do get in touch. We love hearing from you and let us know what you think. Thanks so much for joining us and make sure you taste the rebellion.